Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I am talking to B from the Honest Sorcerer. He writes a popular Substack about the unfolding story of resource limits and the impact that is having on industrial civilization. And I think he now is my favorite writer who brings all of the different perspectives and data together and gives you a snapshot of where the world is on this really vital topic. So I highly recommend people check out The Honest Sorcerer and start reading his work. But that's my quick introduction. B, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how you traveled through life and ended up fascinated with the potentially unfolding collapse of the current cycle of civilization?
Well, thank you for the invitation, first of all, Shane. It's nice to be here, and it is a pleasure to be on your podcast. So, about my journey, it started a long time ago, 2 decades ago, maybe, when the peak oil movement started. This is when I realized that, okay, oil is not going to last forever, and resources are not here forever. But then I was just an undergraduate in a university, and then I realized maybe this is just too much for me. I just simply could not take the topic. It was simply too much for me, and I went back to denial for another 10 or 15 years. It came, the shale revolution and everything like that. And I thought that, okay, it's going to be solved by technical means. After all, I was a technical university student, so I thought that, okay, technology will solve everything. I started working at large multinational companies, and life went on. And then I realized just maybe 15 years later that, okay, maybe life could not go on as long as we imagined or hoped to go on as we imagined, because then climate change will wipe us all out if you just keep burning fossil fuels at this rate. And then I start digging into the topic. Okay, what can we do about this? Okay, so if peak oil is not a big issue, then okay, what can we do to replace oil with solar panels, with wind turbines? I really hope that this will solve the problem, and we can both tackle the issue of peak oil and climate change and everything, and we will be all happy. But then I quickly realized, being a student of technology and then researcher of technology, and I really like to look behind the curtain and see how things work. And then I realized this is not going to work, because all these technologies rely on fossil fuels. And this is when the penny dropped. And I realized we are not going to be saved by technology, because it all depends on oil and all depends on fossil fuels. And we simply cannot get rid of them. And this is going to be a finite resource issue at the end. Even though climate change is going to be bad, it's not going to be bad enough soon enough to have us stop burning fossil fuels, and we will just simply use up all what we can, both from mineral resources, be it metal ores, be it sand, for example. That's also a critical issue, or be it just pure old coal, oil and gas. We are going to use them all up, and then after all, it's going to be a resource issue. And this is when I started to write the blog, and this is how I realized that, okay, I need to talk about this, because this is an issue which is really, really underreported in the media, and really, really underreported everywhere in the blogosphere.
No, I very much appreciate the work that you're doing. I'm curious before we dive into the more technical side of things, just to ask you, what do you think it is about some people's personality that allows them to confront this issue, which is quite, it can be very terrifying and scary, like you experienced at the beginning. Whereas a lot of people, I think, get a glimpse of this and they look away. They don't want to, stay in that headspace for more than, a tiny fraction if they can avoid it. And it also kind of links into the idea, how do you go sharing this information with other people? Do you generally kind of just put a crumb out, and if they don't seem interested, you don't bother beating them over the head with it?
These are really good questions. Actually, it boils down to the question whether you are a truth seeker or whether you would like to belong to a team or belong to a group. And for me, fortunately or not, it comes with a downside. I'm a truth seeker, and I'm not really interested in belonging to a team, even though I know if the whole team or the whole organization is built up on a fairy tale of endless growth. So most people, as I talk to them, and just based on simple interactions, rather would like to accept these fairy tales and myths about human civilization, how we can endure and how we can go on even though there are resource limits, just to stay in the team and just to stay on the group. where they belong to, as opposed to go deep down and research the truth, which then might alienate them from the team. And this is where this is where I came in, because for me, belonging to a team was not that of a big how to say.
Like a priority.
Priority, yeah. That's a word, yeah, not that of a priority, but rather a good thing to have. But it's but for me, truth was more important. And then, even though it came with a shock, as soon as I realized that this is going to end the civilization after all. So when we are digging out the last remaining easily accessible fossil fuels and minerals, it will soon lead to the end of this civilization. I was really terrified. But this is when people usually turn around and go back to the team and seek reaffirmation from the team that, okay, we are going to be fine, hugging each other, okay, we are just going to go through together, and so on and so forth. But for me, there was a nagging feeling in my brain that I have to seek out the truth, and I have to dig deeper and understand why and how it's going to end. And this question of how and why, what was bringing me forward and brought me to this point. And as to your questions, how do I bring up this topic in conversations? Actually, I don't. I wait for clues from other persons. Usually it comes up. So if we are, I really like having long conversations with people. So we are inviting each other for dinner, for example, and then we have long dinner conversations. And usually this topic comes up some way. So even if it's in the form of climate change or rising prices and things like that, and then I start, putting in some questions and asking people where do they stand on this topic, not to convince them, but to monitor the mood, where they are at the moment. Yeah. So where do they stand at the moment? How do they understand the topic at this point? Not to convince them that this is going to end the world, but if they are open to it, I go deeper and we can have a deeper discussion. But most of the people, 90% of the people just really shuts off this topic really soon, and then okay, we can move on, talk about what did we eat for last time dinner, or things like that.
Now, I'm also really interested in tapping into your perspective of somebody who grew up in Eastern Europe. And I wonder if the recent history of the Soviet structure, like rising and then collapsing, and the subsequent demographic decline, I think parts of Eastern Europe have some of the fastest shrinking populations, partly through birth rate issues, but also partly due to younger people just leaving because the EU is wide open to them now. But I wonder how all of that might have influenced your outlook on the trajectory of the industrial system overall.
Well, it gave me the perspective that things can go really bad really soon, and things cannot always improve for the better. So while most Western Europeans who I talk to always believe that things can only get better, and if we are hitting a rough patch, okay, we are going to get over it and then we will move on. My life experience tells me that that stability and reliability can go really fast and really far away. So things can really change under a year or two. So when the communist bloc collapsed, we really felt it, like rising prices. We barely had enough money at the end of the month to pay all our bills and then to have food on the table. So we really had to count all the pennies and forints, as in our currency, to get to the end of the month. We happily, or luckily, we made it always, but it was really a tough call, and it was really a wake-up call for all of us that hey, things can get really bad really fast if the economy collapses and the whole trading bloc, which we were part of, collapses one day to the next. It can happen, and this is what brought me to this idea that okay, the same thing could happen to the Western economies as well, and to the whole Western financial system as well.
Do you think that cultural imprint will give people in Eastern Europe an advantage as the situation continues to evolve, that when the various stresses and shocks come along, they're just going to kind of, shrug and carry on because they've been through similar things, whereas maybe in the Western world we haven't had that kind of direct experience in a very long time?
It's not going to be a positive experience for anyone. So it's definitely not going to be a shrug from our side as well. We are going to just continue and toil on or suffer on. because it's going for many of us in Eastern Europe. I'm lucky because we have good material conditions. I have a good job. It's well paying, so I have no problems in life in terms of money. But for many Eastern Europeans, money is already a big problem. And how do they pay their bills? How do they feed their family? And I can really sympathize with them because again we went through the same issues earlier in my life. So it's going to be a continued struggle for them. So it's not going to be a shrug of a shoulder, but it's going to be rather, just soldiering on and trying to keep keep themselves alive. So this is going to be not that big of a change. It's going to be bad, but it's going to go from bad to worse. But for Westerners, it's going to be a profound shock. Because it's going to be like, hey, we thought that this system can only improve and the things can only get better. Hey, what's going on with the world? This is going to be a really big shock especially for those who are in the upper classes who thought that, okay, they are the rulers of the world and they are the masters of the universe because they manage huge companies and things like that. But this is going to change rather abruptly, and this is going to be really a bad experience for them, a shock, which is we went through already in the early 90s.
Now, I want to get onto the nitty gritty. So the piece that you wrote that maybe made me say, I have to talk to this guy, was a recent post, The Mythical Return of Coal. And I think a lot of people there's a really classic, simple graph about like the size of the relative remaining reserves of oil and gas and coal. And coal is like, huge compared to oil and gas. So I think there's this picture we have in our mind that if we run out of oil and gas, we're just going to go back to burning coal. But your piece really nicely outlines that it's not necessarily going to be that simple. Do you want to just give people a taste of what you were talking about there?
Yeah, so the myth what I'm talking about is coming from both environmental circles and both from industrial circles, that if we are running out of oil, maybe we will go back to coal and then just fire up some coal power plants or turn to coal to liquid transformation. So we will just make liquid fuels out of coal. It's technically possible, for sure. And looking at the charts, everybody says, "Oh, we have coal enough for I don't know 2 or 3 centuries left." So that's fine. That's not going to be an issue. But this is usually calculated by dividing the reserves with current production levels, and current production levels are nowhere near to those production levels which we experienced in Europe in the 1960s, or like you in Australia, or even in the USA. They have much bigger production figures earlier on, and based on those figures, we don't have too much coal left. But that's the smaller issue. The bigger issue is that coal extraction costs have been rising ever since the COVID lockdowns and even before then. But after that, when this energy crisis came in 2021, it was basically 1 year before the Ukraine crisis began. So the crisis already began with natural gas, and the availability of natural gas and also coal prices skyrocketed after the ramp up of production. And then people realized this is not going to work because coal is so heavy, so bulky, and so hard to extract. It takes more and more energy to get the same amount of coal every year, as we have to go deeper and deeper into the bowels of Earth, or we have to remove more rock overburden from open pit mines, or we have to go farther away from civilization, like in case of Australia. You have a lot of coal reserves, but they are so far away from civilization in the middle of a desert. You have to build a railroad track. You have to build a pipeline, or basically, a virtual pipeline, taking all that coal away from that remote location, transporting it to a port, and then putting on a ship and things like that. But all this pipeline, or this virtual pipeline, is operated by diesel trucks and diesel locomotives, because these are so far away from civilization, you don't have electricity there. So you have to use diesel traction power to move these heavy carts full of coal out of these remote locations. And also you have to use heavy excavators and heavy machinery to extract that coal. And if you are having a peak oil problem, which will lead to a peak diesel shortage or peak diesel problem as well, then we don't have enough fuel to continue this ever more energy intensive extractive method. And there goes your dreams about returning to coal.
Yeah, and I often wonder like how much of those theoretical coal reserves are left could be mined in a 19th century way with like ponies and pickaxes. Most of them are so deep and so remote and nowhere near the places that would actually want to use the coal that they're effectively inaccessible without this vast oil-powered infrastructure to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. So if civilization would stop abruptly, I don't know, due to a nuclear war or something crazy like this happening, people could return to these coal mines and dig up some coal which is on the surface. But then as soon as those surface reserves go or depleted, then it's not going to continue. So my ultimate conclusion, and maybe this sounds shocking, but after this civilization is gone and then slowly ramps down in the coming centuries, then there will be no return to coal and no return to industrial civilization anymore. We have used up this one-time reserve, which was made accessible by geological forces. Coal was deposited 400 million years ago in the Carboniferous era. It was not something which is repeatedly done. And those close to surface areas or those close to surface reserves of coal have been already depleted. And if you look at the charts of coal production for each country, you can see how it ramps up and then ramps down. And then there is another myth that oil just replaced coal, but it's not true. So oil not replaced coal in any means. It just moved the coal power production from the railroads to the power plants, but it's turning into electricity instead of steam and steam engine power. So it just enabled more coal production. So when you encounter all those diesel engines which are extracting coal, it just made more coal accessible, as you mentioned.
So if people get to the point where they're like, okay, the oil and the coal is going to be an issue, the next thing they say is, oh, we're just going to go back to a medieval style civilization. But I would even argue that the high quality surface iron ore deposits that allowed the medieval economy to reach its level of complexity, they were all depleted like a century ago, and now we're getting we're getting iron ore from the remote deserts of Australia or the middle of Brazil, shipped to the other side of the planet for the Chinese who still have enough coal left to smelt it and turn it into, items. So I'm actually starting to wonder if we could be living through the end of the Iron Age, that even a medieval level of technology may not be feasible with a much smaller per capita iron production using like wood-based charcoal. I think we're probably going to have like a century or two of recycling all of the metals that we've dug up out of the earth up to this point as the population shrinks. But after that period of time, we're probably going to forget how to make metal from scratch, or the reserves that we need to dig up to even start that process, even assuming we've got plenty of wood charcoal, isn't going to be a possibility. Do you think that's something that's a feasible projection?
Yeah, that's clearly a possibility. But I recently watched a documentary made by another Eastern European experimental archaeologist who is, experimenting with rediscovering these prehistoric techniques, but also medieval techniques to make metal tools. And he just, went out to a random field in Eastern Europe and started to dig around a little bit, and then found coal, not coal, but iron nuggets or iron ore nuggets, which is laying around in the field. If you dig around, it looks like regular rock when you dig up your garden, but it was really not high quality, but medium quality iron ore, which can be then smelted using wooden charcoal. So if you are looking at a very primitive, really medieval society, it can be done. And it can be done for a very long time because iron is not that scarce of a resource. It's not a big issue. It's Earth mantle is half iron. So it's really not a big issue to find enough iron. Is finding the right quality iron, which is free from impurities and it does not result a brittle cast iron, tool, which is, breaks from the first strike. That can be an issue to find the right quality, but I believe, just making a very low tech medieval technology can be possible. But just one remark there, because in medieval times or even in ancient times, people use more wooden tools than metal tools. Metal tools were reserved for the army and for making weaponry. And the average peasant used really wooden sticks to dig stuff around, or even wooden plows to plow the fields. It is possible. It breaks, every time, so you have to constantly repair it and replace it with another plow. But it can be done. It's not the most productive way, but it's possible to make a medieval style civilization purely from recyclable materials like wood, clay, and hay and things like that.
Yeah, and I would also point to the civilizations of the Americas before contact were they had no metal and they were just as complicated and sprawling and sophisticated as the cities in Europe. So it's not necessarily a technology that you have to have, and there might be more interesting, more sustainable ways around it. Um, I also wonder, during the downslope, if a return to biomass for energy could lead to a wave of severe deforestation around the world. Like we chopped down most of the world's forests in like the 1800s with a much smaller population than today. And I wonder if that could be a risk going forwards, that there could be ecological devastation.
Yeah, for densely populated areas, definitely. So as you mentioned, we chopped down every tree almost in Europe because it was so densely populated even before the Industrial Revolution that there was a serious wood shortage in Europe before coal was being used for high quantities. So it can happen in densely populated areas, and since the world is really densely populated, it means basically half of the world or a third of the world's surface is going to be clear cut to have anything to burn, even to make food or make some heat in the winter. So that's clearly an issue. But for remote locations, I mean, the taiga in Russia or in Canada or the Amazonas or the deep Amazonas will not be hurt anymore because there will be no machines which can inside these forests and then bring back the wood. So on the edges, we will chip away everything and we will, cut down everything. But this huge forest hopefully will remain intact. Were it not for climate change and were it not for for the abrupt shift in climate, where these forests can turn into a savanna or just burn down because of the heat. That's the issue, and this is what we don't know at the moment. So we are in the dark or in the just trying to figure out, okay, what's going to happen with this forest. It's a very big question.
Another thing I'm really interested to get your perspective on. So we're now suddenly waking up to realizing that global fertility is falling far faster than any of the UN demographers suspected it would. And ultimately, a key factor in society is the per capita production of fossil fuels. Do you have any ideas about how the demographic decline and the fossil fuel production decline could mirror each other? Could that actually smooth the stresses during the transition if it's a long, slow decline in fossil fuel levels and the population kind of adjusts to mirror that in some way?
Theoretically, it's too early to tell. So it is very hard to tell because we haven't reached the downslope of fossil fuel production yet.
Yeah,
I predict it's going to happen later this decade or maybe earlier the first half of next decade when we will hit the peak and then start declining in overall oil production and coal and natural gas production. So it's really hard to tell, and really hard to tell how fast this decline will be. It really depends on economics because it's all driven by the price of these resources. If prices can go higher, which I really doubt, because then it will wreck the economy, then we can push out this peak a few years, but not that much. But it depends on again societies, because in Western societies or in Eastern European societies as well. So we are in the same boat actually. Fertility is, I believe, much more driven by the cost of living crisis, because then people realize I will not have the money to raise this kid. It's going to cost too much to have the tuition fees paid or to have a bigger house to house the children and things like that. So this can be a huge limiting factor, and the fossil fuels get more expensive as they deplete. This is one scenario. Then it's going to raise the cost of living to a level where people just stop having kids, and the decline will be even steeper than it is today. Or in the other hand, if peak oil is going to be deflationary and then just push down prices, as people will not have enough wages or enough money to spend on these type of products, which require the fossil fuels to make, and then this will just simply kill demand. This is also a scenario that demand is killed and then prices just go down and down. um, then that can be an issue, because then we will have a lot of poor people living day to day, and then we will have a dying fossil fuel industry, which is lacking any investment to dig deeper and to bring out the last remaining reserves, which is good from a climate perspective, but very bad from the society perspective. So we can have a situation when everybody is rather poor, but then having still more kids because they still hope for a better future. So it is very hard to tell at the moment, but in theory, it can happen. And in theory, it is possible that we will go down hand in hand with fossil fuel production.
And you mentioned briefly as well the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. That's another interaction with peak oil, peak coal that I don't see explored very often. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that front. The only one study I've seen that seems reasonably serious, but it's quite old now, was a NASA one where they used a whole bunch of different assumptions for um, oil and coal peaking and then declining through the 21st century, and they couldn't actually get their models much above 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide, which means we might be pretty much at the peak of CO2 levels at this point. Although that said, the models do allow for, I mean, centuries of impacts that take time to kind of re-equilibrate across the entire planet. But do you at least find a little bit of hope that the linear projections that just assume more and more coal and gas are consumed all the way up to 2100 and causing absolutely catastrophic climate change, they don't seem like they're plausible anymore if you consider the probable reality of peak oil and peak coal?
Yeah, and this is why I always look at the middle of the road scenarios when I look at climate projections, not the fast decarbonization scenario, because this is not technically possible at all without breaking and destroying society as it is.
Mm.
So if we follow the middle of the road scenarios, not the endless extraction forever, because that's technically impossible again, it can lead us to a 2 to 3 degrees world, which is still bad. But I'm afraid these scenarios do not calculate with climate tipping points, and do not calculate with increased methane release from the permafrost and things like that. And the problem is that CO2 is only just half of the picture. The other half of warming comes from nitrous oxides, which is released from agriculture and also from mining and from industrial processes, and also methane, which is a very big culprit in raising temperatures. So totally convinced that we are going to stop at 2 to 3 degrees. I'm afraid we can easily hit 4 or 5 degrees by the end of the century if methane is going to be released, or if the tipping points tip, like the northern Atlantic overturning circulation, the Gulf Stream stops or just diverts a little bit southwards, and even Amazon dries up and things like that. So this can happen, which I'm not sure if they will happen. This is a scenario, but so at this point, it's very hard to predict how the depletion of fossil fuels will interact with the climate, because there are many other factors which are affecting the climate.
Do you have any theories about why peak oil, peak coal isn't studied more explicitly in the climate change community? It seems to be something that isn't on their radar. At least I haven't heard them talk about it very often.
Yeah, one story I heard from a climate scientist is that they are asking for advice from economists, and we know economists. They always believe in endless growth, and then this can continue forever. So they take their assumptions from economists, who then project, oh, we can extract coal forever, or we can extract oil forever. We just need the right incentives, which is factually wrong, because oil has peaked in many countries already, even though there were plenty of incentives to continue extract it. But then it peaked and then started to decline in many countries, especially in OPEC countries, for example. Oil is already declining in many places,
Mm.
and they still presume somehow that this is going to continue forever. And this is the problem with climate science, and basically every field of science. They are so focused on their area of expertise that they forget to integrate the knowledge what other fields of knowledge have, or other fields of expertise have. And they just focus on their field and then just take everything as granted from other fields. That okay, they will solve the mining issue, they will solve the resource issue, and that's not a problem. We will just focus on how to build more solar panels, because that's going to save the planet.
Yeah.
And that's really crazy.
Mm. Now, the final thing, I'm curious if you have thought about how it interacts with peaking of fossil fuels. What impact do you think the very flashy advances in artificial intelligence could feed into the dynamic of a world that's becoming more constrained in terms of energy and resources.
Hmm. Well, it's on the short run, it's going to be a bottleneck, as we already experienced. So it's not big news that it's raising prices for consumers, and it's going to be a huge issue for producing enough gas turbines to produce all that electricity. There is already a huge back order for gas turbines to produce all that electricity, and this is why they are looking up geothermal or even reviving old nuclear plants to power these data centers. But on the long term, it really doesn't matter because we would burn all this coal, oil, and gas anyway. So if it were not for these data centers, we would burn it in our cars or we will burn them in power plants. It just brings the end closer with a few years. And as soon as the bubble bursts, because this is and for sure, this AI is just a myth, a bubble, because I also work with AI in my daily job, and I now know its limitations. It's basically a large language model. It's not going to save or change the world. This is a text generator, so it's useful for extracting text or working with large bodies of text, but it's not really useful for solving the world's issues or or doing anything more than just generating more text or more images or more content. So as soon as this bubble bursts, then we will go back to this old churn of consuming resources as they became available.
Mm. It'll be interesting to see the politics of AI energy use if consumers start pushing back, or whether they even have enough political power to push back. I suspect in many places they don't.
But in many places they do have. I heard some stories, some positive stories from I mean it was in Texas where they successfully prevented a data center from being built. That's possible that local communities stand up together and then say no to this type of data centers. It is a positive message. It can happen, and it's a good thing that it can happen. But in the long term, in the big picture, it really doesn't going to matter. So it's just really one of those factors which is complicating life or making life harder at the moment, but it's not going to make or break this civilization.
Yeah, yeah. Now, let's move on to talk a bit more about politics and culture. Do you have any predictions about the issue of resource depletion breaking over into the popular mindset at some point in the future? Or do you think we're going to go all the way down, like with our blindfold on, as a population, not really realizing what's happening, like always finding some other explanation about why things are getting harder?
That's a tricky question because resource depletion, just like climate change, is started to being or become like a political hot button issue, which people rally around or rally against. So this is going to be more like a political belief system rather than a fact-based analysis in most people's mind. And this we can already see in Europe because European leadership is already starting to warm the population up that, hey, we are going to have some resource limitations. The good days are over. We are heading into resource decline. But on the other hand, they spend money like it's for free. And this creates a huge cognitive dissonance in the people that, okay, how these people can spend so much money on things like remilitarization or things like, I don't know, corruption, because corruption is prevalent everywhere, and how they can continue these lifestyles while we are being told that we are going to run out of resources, we are going to have to, live more, more
Frugal.
frugal way. Yeah, that's
Yes,
the word.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
more frugal way. And this is not going to be a way which we want to follow. And then far right politics clutches onto this topic, and then they start, putting it on their agenda that this is a top agenda to restore prosperity and restore energy flows and restore everything, and then we will be again back to the happy life of the 1990s. But that's not possible. So this is why it's dangerous when politics touches something. It almost always instantly corrupts it. So it then turns into a party politics topic, and then it cannot be discussed in polite circles anymore.
I was really fascinated during the COVID episode about how that information system rapidly changed cultural norms. Like it turned the whole population of the world on a dime in a way that I've never seen happen before. It's an amazing power, amazingly dangerous as well too if it's used poorly. But I wonder if it could actually be used to reverse the last 100 years of consumerist programming that people, like from birth basically, are given constant messages that you need to buy these things of like increasing price to feel good about yourself and like have esteem and comfort and you know that counts as success. And I wonder if that could actually be reversed using the information technology while we have it, so that people, you know, don't burn their cities down because they didn't get a new iPhone.
Hmm. Well, it's again it's a topic of economics. So it's good to talk about ideas and how we can change the way people think, but it boils down to the personal economics of each and every person. So when you have enough money, or let's say what my personal experience again, what I see around myself. If people don't have money and they don't have any resources to spend on gadgets, they simply don't, or just really buy the second-hand used gadget, and they happy to have something at least, and they will just think about the next day, how do they survive the next day. On the other hand, younger generations already see that they are priced out of the housing market, especially in Europe, in everywhere, basically. They are priced out of the housing market. They cannot afford a home anymore. So why bother? I just spend my money on iPhone. I just spend my money on a new BMW or whatever. And then I will just consume as much as I can, because at least this gives me some kind of happiness or some kind of an accomplishment. So this is how I can, treat myself after a hard working day. At least, okay, I can buy myself the newest iPhone, even though I don't have money for a family, or even though I don't have money for an own flat or an own house. So this is really a personal choice or personal topic, which is going to be very different depending on where you look at it or how you look at it.
I realized as well the iPhone was the worst possible example because that's the channel that gets the information to the people to influence how they see the world. So you could probably, in theory, if you had good enough digital entertainments and distractions, you could strip almost everything away from people and they wouldn't notice. They'd be too distracted by whatever's going on in their screens. So maybe that's kind of part of the dynamic. Um, I have a. This is how I'm kind of predicting the future. I think we're heading into an era of techno-authoritarianism, where there's a loss of democracy. I think we're already seeing a loss of effective democracy. There's surveillance, there's suppression, there might be rationing and universal basic incomes coming in various degrees. But that kind of model is so dependent on complex technology to function that at some point the resources to make it coordinate are not going to be available anymore. And that's the point, probably a few decades in the future, where you'll get regional collapses where control is lost. Or the global system just decides it's not profitable to maintain control of that province anymore. I think the Romans did this. They like looked at the sums and said, and even the British with India looked at their like profit loss statements at one point and said, "Oh, this is costing us money. Let's liberate India," and they're on their own from here on. So yeah, I
Business
wonder
model.
what do you think about that? My personal prediction for where things are likely to go in the next few decades.
Yeah, so energy is definitely going to be a critical factor in this topic. But from a political perspective, it will be more important than ever to generate more crises than ever, just to justify why do we need rationing, why do we need all these kind of austerity measures, because we are living in a huge crisis. I don't know what will be the next crisis of the day, but I'm sure that they will find enough crises to blame all the decline upon. And this is going to be, I believe, the major theme, this long emergency, as James Howard, Chancellor, used to call it. This is going to be an endless series of emergencies, even partially real or partially unreal. It really doesn't matter, because then for the ruling class, it will be a real emergency, and then they will use every power they have to survey us and to force every kind of austerity measure on us, which they think is necessary to continue on. And if they don't have the electricity or the physical power to continue to exert this type of the surveillance, every time they will return to the paper method and then just hand out paper checks to use and to pay them with the cashiers, or just printing more money. We will go through these phases, but I believe it's going to be a rapid going back to time. So not going to be a persistent state where we go back to time to a level of energy consumption where this techno society can be held together, but it's going to be a long and rather rapid decline compared to the rise of this society. So when it took, more than half a century or even 70 to 80 years from the Second World War to get to this point of level of technological advancement, and if you just rewind yourself back to the Second World War when everything was printed on paper, products were made out of wood and metal, so there was no plastics virtually. So these type of things will be attempted, but since we are so many of us and so higher demands than what we used to have in the Second World War, we're just going to consume this type of resources really, really fast. And we are just going to be really, really fast down this curve back to the level which is really sustainable. And this is pre-Second World War II level. So this is going to be a very, very simple society in a very short amount of time compared to what it took to get here.
Maybe this is just me, but I actually have a bit of sympathy for the elites that are nominally in charge of all of this. I always think of the model of like astronauts strapped into the command capsule with like all of that explosive fuel underneath them, that if everything goes perfectly, it can carry them like into the moon and back. Mm-hmm. But one tiny thing breaks and it all just turns into a fireball and consumes them along with everything else. Do you kind of see that perspective as well to some degree, that they're managing a very messy system that they probably don't fully understand either?
Yes, and this is where my empathy dies, because I really see the lack of competence from their side, so to really understand what's going on and what can be done or what should be done. And they are driven by political interest or personal interest and personal motivations rather than thoughtful considerations. Okay, what would be best for my society? And this is where they completely lose my empathy, because they are so selfish and so honestly stupid that I really cannot empathize with them. So they basically, most of their issues, what they are experiencing, they are engineered for themselves by this type of power grabbing and this type of power politics. What they are doing for the last few decades is really engineering much of the problems we experience today. Were it not for these type of power-hungry elites, again, this is again an ideal situation where people are not power-hungry. I know humans as a species are power-hungry species. So there will be always people who will come and rise to the top and would like to govern all of us. But if we were a wise species, as our name suggests, Homo sapiens, then we could manage this downturn or decline rather smoothly. But with this type of elites and this type of mindset in the everyday people, where they seek power, where they seek authority in persons, it's not going to be manageable. It's going to be the rocket and fireball situation.
I wonder as well, does the history of living through the USSR give some lessons on how to endure an authoritarian period in government? Like how do ordinary people best react to that kind of shifting baseline and presumably come out the other side?
Well, it was a very different story, because I did not technically live in the USSR. I grew up in Eastern Europe, in Hungary. Mm-hmm. It's a neighboring state to the USSR, but part of the communist bloc. Mm-hmm. So we are fully under the repression of the Soviet state. And there was a commissar from from the Soviet Union who managed the situation here in Hungary. He was brought in a tank to rule over us after the revolution. So it's really not a popular leader, but he tried to make himself popular by going into debt and making some welfare for the people. So it was a rather stable and rather economically prosperous, so to say, period for or compared to the post-war years, where really everything collapsed. So that was another collapse experience from my grandparents. The Second World War, which basically destroyed the country. It was really an after-collapse experience. And compared to that, and compared to the era of revolution and the repression before that revolution, the aftermath when I grew up, so the after the revolution period in the 70s and 80s, there was a really calm period which was managed rather well by my parents and by everybody else. So it was not that hard of a period of time. So I cannot have any or cannot provide any relevant experience here because then we experience some kind of a mild improvement, but not a declining period. But we are looking for a declining period, which is more like the 1990s after the communist bloc fell and then the whole trading bloc fell apart and then really devastated the economies of Eastern Europe. So I could compare that to our current situation when with rapid industrialization, lots of people losing their jobs. Everybody's trying to find some alternative job, just doing part-time jobs or doing trading, trying to smuggling goods from other countries and trying to sell it on a flea market. So those type of exotic things are going to come back again.
Mm. I wonder too if countries like yours are on a more manageable scale for like post-industrial governance, that countries like the US is the classic example, but even the Soviet Union was just too big to hold together when things became stressed. And yeah, I wonder if you have any thoughts about the pros and cons of living in a smaller nation.
Hmm. Well, smaller nations is easier to have together, especially if they are if they consist of a single um, nationality.
Mm.
That's easier to hold together. Where multiple nationalities live together, then conflicts will arise just because things are declining, and the nationality A will blame nationality B for for the decline, and they will just part ways. And this is why I believe the European Union cannot stay together in such a situation. So when decline really hits, and we are already on a declining path since 2019, even 17, so we are still economically declining since then. When the decline hits a more steeper curve, or when we are hitting the steep part of the decline, the situation will be impossible to manage and hold together. And I'm afraid the same is going to happen in the United States as well, when one political side will blame the other side for things not going well, and then this will create a rupture in the society and also in geographic terms, trying to break up these type of huge entities.
Mm, mm. Well, I think of it, I should ask about your perspective on logistics, because I think that's your speciality. You have your hands on industrial logistics systems, moving things all over the planet. What special insights do you bring to that system in the view of declining fossil fuel availability?
Yeah, the special insights came from basically my education as a technical university student in industrial design and industrial product design and manufacturing. So I took a manufacturing course also. So manufacturing, say, specialty in this course. So as I mentioned, I was always fascinated by how things made, and I started working at a manufacturing company as a manufacturing shop floor engineer to support the machinery on the shop floor. So I basically walked through every stage of the supply chain from raw material sourcing to shop floor manufacturing to distributing those products via the logistic chain. So based on my 20 years of experience in this area, I can bring in some real insights, how things are made, how things are distributed, how things work actually in the real life. Because I believe most people who are not educated in this field, or who are coming from an economic field, for example, do not know these experiences firsthand. They do not have a firsthand experience how things are really made and how difficulties can arise when shortages arise, or what can be done when shortages arise. And this leads us to have two type of people. One type believes that everything can be solved and then we will solve everything. And the other type believes that the supply chain can break anytime now. But neither is true. So supply chains are really a complex adaptive system which tries to adapt to shortages. They will always try to find some kind of an alternative supplier to a part which is missing, which can lead to, I don't know, temporary shortages. Or in case of the COVID crisis, we had a shortage of automotive chips, which lasted, I don't know, 2 to 3 years maybe, but then it was eventually sorted out and automotive production did not stop for that time. So even though there are shortages and there will be critical situations, it's not going to stop the entire supply chain. And this is also a perspective which needs to be brought into this analysis.
Were there any lessons learned from the COVID interruptions that you've seen systems and attitudes change to building in more resilience, even if it costs a little bit more?
Yes, definitely. So companies are looking for local suppliers just to avoid these long distance shipments and try to diversify their supplier base to have more smaller suppliers all around the world, just in case something breaks. So if the shipping lane breaks down or the country is in war where my supplier is, I have at least supplier B in a different country, in a different region of the world where I can still source my parts. So this is definitely going on. I'm not saying this is 100% of the case. In case of many parts, companies still rely on one single supplier, which is a huge issue. When that supplier goes down, it can bring down several other companies. But it's more like a Jenga tower. So if you imagine the global supply chain with all the participants, it's like a Jenga tower. So if you remove one or two blocks, it will not fall apart. But if you start removing blocks one by one, year after year, you can go on for a very long time, even 20 years, by moving out one block after another. But then you pull out the wrong block, and then everything collapses. So this is where we know that when we know that this is when things are going to end. So not one day to the next, but really block by block, one by one for decades. And then finally, the whole thing falls apart. But by then, everybody will be so used to having crisis all the time that this is going to look like just another crisis.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, the manufacture, particularly of high-end computer chips, is probably one of the most bottlenecked, fragile pivot points in the global manufacturing system. Do you have any thoughts about how the system is attempting to adapt to that choke point? I've been following a little bit about the plants they're trying to build in Arizona in the US, and it's a far more complicated challenge than I think they were originally hoping.
It is, and it requires a skilled workforce. So you cannot hire people from the Amazon warehouse to run these type of operations. You will need to have engineering expertise there, and this is where the other bottleneck comes from the West, because most of the people are basically desk skilled or trained in areas of social sciences, economics, law, and things like that, which has nothing to do with real engineering work. And the engineering output of these Western countries is very, very low compared to China, for example, where they train engineers by the millions, literally, every year. And they can do basically every type of manufacturing job because they have the skill, they have the expertise, and they have the local supplier base. And this is what's really hard to break. Or this is the foresight of the Chinese government, and this is not a propaganda for Chinese, it's just the fact what I have seen during the past 2 decades, that they have built up block by block their own supply chains internally within the country. So from mining to processing to finished products, in case of chips, for example, they can do everything in one country. They do not depend on anybody else. Maybe for some parts, yes, they can trade, or maybe for energy, they have to trade, but they try to build up the whole supply chain within the country and try to optimize for efficiency within their country. This is what we are missing in Eastern Europe, or even Western Europe, and in America as well, that we have outsourced our supply chains to China because it was easier to make them there. And then we are lacking critical blocks from the supply chain in Europe. So even though if we build up a chip factory here, we don't have the wafer fab, which makes the wafers for these chips, or we don't have the rare earth metal capacity to to supply those fabs with the rare earths which are needed to make those chips or make these components.
What do you think about the theory that manufacturing shifted to China because they had the last large, easily accessed, high quality coal resource that they basically used to crash their electricity price and outcompete all of the other factories of the world that were at or just past their local peak coal?
That's absolutely true. So China still makes half of its electricity from coal. So, like it or not, it's not a nuclear state or not a renewable state. It's a coal-based economy, and their coal production is also peaking. And this is a huge issue because this is why they are going to build, or this is why they are currently building a huge dam or series of dams in the Himalayas to capture the power of hydro there in a very remote location. By the way, this is why they are building out solar and wind and everything, and building more nuclear plants than ever just to try to somehow compensate. But I'm afraid they will not be able to make it. The difference is just too huge. And the challenges posed by renewables and posed by this type of intermittent electricity is going to be too huge even for them to manage. And this is going to cause a huge issue. So yes, coal was a huge played a huge role in attracting manufacturing there.
Do you think China's biggest strategic weakness is their dependence on oil imports? Because oil does so many critical, particularly mobility functions in the economy.
That's also part of the picture, yes, because they don't have enough oil. They extract a lot of oil, by the way. So 4 million barrels per day. It's not an insignificant amount, but they still have to import, I don't know, 11 or 12 million barrels. I'm not sure about the numbers, but a huge amount of oil needs to be imported. This is why they also try to diversify by turning trucks into LNG trucks, so driven by liquid natural gas, or electrifying as much of the transportation what they can, but they are still electrifying only the cars and some of the trucks which are running inside the cities. But long distance transport is still impossible to electrify even for them. It's like shipping or like trucking across the country or moving trains across the vast expenses of the country. So oil is going to be definitely a bottleneck for them besides coal. So this is going to be a really tough time for the entire world economy, not just for us, but for China as well.
Now, another topic I love asking people about is if you've thought at all about what the cultural impact could be when the internet degrades and eventually disappears, because it's the biggest, most complicated machine that we've made to this point. AI is trying to go to the next level. But we've become so used to it being part of our life and to do a whole lot of, basic functions and a whole lot of frivolous functions as well. But I think we're already living through the degradation of our internet experience. Yeah, do you have any ideas about how that might play out as it becomes less of a presence in culture?
Well, that's a tough question because especially younger generations are so hooked on the internet, and even myself, we are so tied to the internet just for entertainment and also for managing our daily lives. Bank accounts, personal identity, everything is also managed by the internet. So when this starts to break down and starts to become intermittent, then it's going to be a huge challenge for societies to revert back to an earlier method. I'm sure they will try. So I'm sure that nobody will sit idle and watch things collapse. I'm sure that governments around the world will try to go back to a old type of monetary system where they use printed money or real tangible money instead of this type of digital tokens what we use today, and also try to go back to the same printed identity cards which can be used. But it's going to be a huge challenge, and honestly, it's really hard to predict what will happen when things really start to break up and the internet goes away.
Yeah, it's looming, but it's hard to even begin to get a grip on what it could look like. And going further than that you mentioned like transitioning to a return to a paper-based economy, but even producing paper in those scales relies on like 19th century industrial technology. If you go back to medieval times, paper was really rare and expensive, and you didn't use it to make a shopping list or those kind of things. And I wonder if we could be heading to a stage further down the road where even paper isn't abundant like it was before, if there could be an even more profound cultural transformation ahead. Any thoughts?
That's certainly a possibility that paper shortages will arise. But then again, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what gives? So what will we give up then? Because it can happen that okay, we will not have any more paper for packaging, but then we will have to use more plastic. It's really a tough call to answer this type of questions because there are so many moving parts and there are so many things which can change based on that it's hard to tell whether paper exactly is going to be the bottleneck where we have a short supply. Probably not, because if we are frugal with paper, we can recycle it a lot of times. We can still use it for different purposes, and maybe it's not going to be that of an issue, but who knows?
Mm, mm. Oh, do you have any insights into the plastic and petrochemical industry? Like oil as an energy source for engines usually gets most of the attention, but those high value, very sophisticated products are all up and down our supply chains, and they can be quite difficult to replace. Have you thought about that vulnerability in the system?
Hmm. It's going to be hard to replace, but that's definitely not going to be the bottleneck. And this is what I can say almost for sure, because the problem with oil extraction, as I explained in one of my articles, is that we are lacking those type of dense molecules in oil, which makes diesel and jet
Mm.
fuel available. And this is going to be the true bottleneck because the real economy is still moved by diesel engines and jet fuel and bunker fuel, which is tanked into the ships, which are moving things around. And if we cannot make enough of these fuels and we replace those good quality or dense enough fuels with low quality fuels like from shale oil or from fracking, this is going to be a huge issue for the transportation business, but less of an issue for the petrochemical business because
Okay.
petrochemicals are built from these light oils, which are really lacking the density and the qualities of a good fuel, but is really good for making more plastics and making more stuff or more cheap plastics, basically. So I believe this is not going to be an issue for the foreseeable future. In
Interesting.
fact, the issue is going to be that we are still going to have too many plastics or too much
Yeah,
plastic.
yeah. Well, it reminds me that, that crude oil is fractionated into all of those different products, and some of them cross-subsidize others. And
Hmm.
two that are subsidized by diesel and jet fuel are asphalt. So all of our roads are literally paved with oil. And I love this as as a thought experiment to people who are like, oh, we'll just all drive electric cars. And it's like, on what? You actually need you
Exactly.
need that cheap oil to actually make the roads, and if you did it with concrete, the costs and the durability, like there's so many problems with concrete roads compared to the cheap asphalt ones that you can afford to put everywhere. And the gasoline fraction as well previously didn't have any uses until we invented passenger cars to just burn it up with people
Exactly.
driving around the suburbs for no particular reason. So yeah, you can't just make various fractions of that crude oil disappear. They have to go somewhere. Mm.
Yes, exactly. So if even if a large country like the United States or China just simply ditches every petrol car and switch to electric cars, then all that gasoline will have to go somewhere. It will be still generated because we still need diesel fuel. So there comes a large portion of fuels like gasoline. So it will be basically shipped to the global south, where gas cars will be so cheap to operate and so cheap to make that they will use that all up, and then we just shifted consumption from one place to another.
Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. So I also wanted to ask, you may not be aware of this, but I have a real interest in like pre-industrial and potentially post-industrial agriculture. And I'm wondering if any of the traditions in your part of the world have survived in any functional form, if people recognize the value in it during the age of cheap industrial food and kind of kept things going in the margins to fall back on.
Yeah, as you mentioned, on the margins. So
Mm,
city folks who, like programmers who were programming software in their previous life, now move to the rural areas. They buy some land there and try to recreate this type of techniques. It is, certainly possible, and they are certainly doable. But they still rely on the larger civilization to grow all the food. So they
mm,
cannot be, self-reliant, especially not from grains, which require huge machinery to make efficiently. So what they are usually doing, they are doing some vegetables, they are doing potatoes or things like that, which can be grown in small gardens. That's fine, and that's really good that we are experimenting with these old techniques without using fossil fuels and without using pesticides and things like that. This is really good that we are experimenting with that, but this is not going to save us in the large scale because we are so many of us, even in this tiny country where I live, that it's impossible to feed this many people with horse-drawn carts and horse-drawn plows and things like that. We are just too overpopulated to do that.
I think pretty much everywhere on the planet is about 10 times the pre-industrial population, pretty uniformly. And yeah, well,
In our case, we are just double the pre-industrial population,
okay.
I believe. It's roughly double. And also the area of agriculture has been also expanded, but it's also drying up because of not only because of climate change, but because of our bad agricultural practices. We
Mm,
are diverting water away from these previously water-clogged areas because my country was half of a swamp, basically.
mm,
It was a water-clogged area for many centuries. But they started to drain those swamps, so to say, those water-clogged areas after the Second World War and created much more agricultural land based on that. But as these processes continue, this draining process continues into the future, it simply dries up the land because there are not enough rainfall in our area to compensate for the soil moisture, which was previously been locked up in these
mm,
swamps. So this is going to be another issue. Even though if we have even enough fossil fuels, we will still have an agricultural issue. And this is not just in our country, but for every other country. We have already passed peak farmland, which means that across the world, the arable area has been peaked and now declining because of these environmental factors. We are simply degrading our arable land faster than we can break up new land.
yeah, yeah. It's a thorny problem. Um, Now, I also wanted to get your perspective on what you see as the potential of religion in managing culture through this very, what's likely to be a somewhat traumatic or maybe very traumatic process. And do you have any perspective on what role existing religions could serve, and maybe even that a new religion, like the transformation could be traumatic enough for civilization that it finds new religions. And I would refer back to Christianity emerging during the Roman Empire as it was falling apart as a kind of counter reaction.
But then it was already a religious state. So even they switched from polytheism to monotheism, Christian culture before the collapse, they remained a religious culture. So
Mm,
they practiced religious practices all across their lives. But in our case, in our present case, in the Western Hemisphere, I really see that there is a huge turning away from religion. There
mm,
are conservatives who are clinging to religion. But if I go to a funeral and just look around the temple, just barely any people to be seen, really. And most of the people just stand in front of the temple, wait for the ceremony to be finished, and then go to the grave and bury the individual. But it's really not. I don't see that there is a mass movement back to religion and mass
mm,
movement back to the temple and going back to religious practices, because most people see it as an outdated ideology, which they grew out of basically, and they were not raised as religious people. I was not raised religious as well, but I respect religion. So this is for me a part of showing respect. But for many people, it's really just not part of their lives. So what I'm really afraid of, when things really go bad and start to decline really bad, there will be no go back to religion, but really just everybody just sitting in apathy and then just crying for the lost lives they had, the lost prosperity they had, and then turn to drinking because that's going to be a new religion.
mm. I do know that was a problem during the Soviet collapse. A lot of people who lost a sense of purpose basically just drank themselves to death prematurely. Hmm. I also wonder too, if a counter religion, a counter reaction against the scientific worldview, like viewing it as the source of the destruction, could be something that bonded people together to kind of as a rejection of what was lost.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question? I
Oh,
couldn't understand the
no, sorry.
first one.
That people could find a culture which is based on rejecting scientific materialism, and like it kind of demonizes the industrial era as kind of like sour grapes, like good riddance, as a way of comforting themselves for all of the things that have gone away.
For a short period of time, sure. So, and it will be a relief for many. It will be a relief, especially if we are combining it with universal basic income. Then people can start to believe, hey, we don't need to work anymore, man. It was just a hustle, a lot of stress, and then why do we need this anymore? We just need food and we just need some basic clothing. We will be happy. For a decade or two, this can persist. But after that, when people start to realize, hey, that somebody has to still work on the fields and somebody still has to work in the food and clothing factory, then there is going to be the realization that, hey, we are not going to survive without some form of industrialization. So we will, go back into the factories and try to work there, or try to establish small workshops in local cities and local places. So this is but I believe that we are going to have some smaller businesses and some smaller workshops all around the country trying to recreate some of the activities which was previously served by huge six-continent supply chains and manufacturing companies.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you about that. If you could see a process of simplification in the manufacturing and logistics system, that, you go from high-end chips in your cars to low-end chips and then eventually back to no chips.
Yeah, that's the hard part, because we are so used to having chips in our cars and chips in everything, from the tractor on the field to basically everything has a chip inside. Going back to a chipless technology, it's going to be a huge challenge, and this is what I believe, where scavenger economy you mentioned, this recycling economy comes into the picture, that people will try to recycle as much as they can from old parts, or try to keep old technology alive, which was not built around chips. But the old tractors, which are rotting in some kind of a shed, will be restored to their working conditions, because they don't have chips, they don't have any electronics inside, they just built from metal and driven by oil. Yeah. So that's still a possibility that we will revert to those old technologies, or try to rebuild those type of old technologies.
I also wanted to get your perspective if you think a black swan type event, other than fossil fuel depletion, could come along at just the right time. Like, historians could look back and say, it was because the asteroid hit us, and would never really get that this was happening in the background. Do you think any of those are worth worrying about, or are they kind of just minor possibilities to have at the back of your mind?
No, the first thing comes to mind is the financial crisis, which is coming. This is going to be on the level of the 1929 financial crisis, or even worse. So I'm really afraid that this is going to hurt us really bad. And this is where historians will point back in time, who are just focusing on the human system. And this is my other issue with humanity, is that they always focus on the human system. They never look behind the scenes. Okay, what's driving the human system? But for historians who are just looking at the human part of things, they will point back to this financial crisis really made the end of the civilization, and this is where things started to go really bad, or this war, or this other crisis on the other part of the world. But it's mainly is going to be the Western system's financial crisis, which will threaten the eastern part of the hemisphere, because China and Russia are also building up their alternative financial systems, which is really good. But if their customers are going bankrupt, like in Southeastern Asia, just because they are tied to this Western financial system and they will not be able to buy their products, they are going to be hurt as well. So it's going to be a ripple-on effect, which will shake basically the whole world economy. And I'm sure that everybody is trying to do everything to stop or prevent it from happening, but I believe it's unavoidable at this point of time.
Here's a question. Do you think a fragmentation of the world financial and logistical trading system in the short term could actually be beneficial in the long run if it stimulates reformation and simplification of regional economies?
Yeah, definitely. So even though politicians can do a lot of bad things, or can make things even worse than they are, but this one thing is actually helpful in the future, because it's much better to have a fracturing system than no system at all. If you would have just one single unified system, if something breaks, then the whole system breaks and everybody is off to the races. But if we have multiple systems, if one system dies or one system crashes to the ground, then the other system can take its place, or at least help reviving it. So actually, this is a very good thing that we are are seeing a fracturing of global supply chains, even though from a political perspective or from today's perspective, it looks bad or looks challenging, but on the long term, it's really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I would refer back Roman Empire. You can't get away from it. The splitting into the Western and the Eastern half when they were having governing difficulties managing it all. And yeah, the Eastern half, if it had been tied to the West for any longer, it probably would have been pulled down at the same time. But it managed to limp along. Well, not even limp along. It did quite well for like another 1,000 years after the Western side
Yeah.
fell apart. So yeah, there's some potential there. What about the potential for epidemics? Do you think that is kind of a overlooked issue that could affect people's day-to-day lives at some point?
At some point, yes. If the medical system breaks down as it is, especially in the US, I heard and hear this is really horror stories how the medical system is unaffordable for the most of the people. If they will not be able to treat their illnesses, especially some kind of an infectious disease comes up,
Mm.
I don't know how they will manage it. So that's going to be a huge issue there. Even though not a global epidemic, but local epidemics can easily happen from previously preventable diseases.
Mm. My bet is on something unspectacular and slow moving like tuberculosis because it just kind of ticks away in the background. There isn't like a huge event where everyone notices that something is happening. It just kind of creeps in at the margins and changes the structure of the population.
And other infectious diseases, which makes our lifespan shorter. So
Mm.
we always forget that these type of diseases were the primary cause of death for hundreds of years.
Mm.
And if the healthcare system breaks down as it is, then it can be another primary cause of death and can cause early deaths really fast. Like tuberculosis or I don't know those type of infectious diseases like cholera, which we thought that we got rid of. But if the sanitary system breaks down, then this is going to be a huge issue again. Again,
Mm.
not a global epidemic, but as you mentioned, a slow burning crisis which eats away your lifespans.
Mm. Well, in general, do you think, at least at the present moment, that the fossil fuel depletion issue is too slow moving for our media and information system to latch onto it? Like we had a little bit of attention in like 2007 and 8 when we had that, dramatic spike in oil prices to $150 a barrel. But when it dropped down again to, $70, $80 a barrel and it stayed there, there was no headline, there was no news, there was nothing to talk about. There was no lion jumping out of the grass to like scream and run away from. So yeah, do you think our sense making systems are uniquely badly suited to deal with these kind of slow moving disasters?
Definitely, and especially our storytelling brain, which starts the story that okay, we are going to solve the crisis by switching to renewables, for example, or switching to nuclear, and there's no issue for for fossil fuel depletion because we are going to generate all the electricity and we will drive electric cars. But this is nonsense,
Mm.
and this nonsense can be held up for quite a long time until the real crisis arrives when really the shortages arrive and there will be really product shortages because there will be no trucks to deliver the products from the warehouse to the supermarket. Then people will start to realize, maybe fossil fuels are important after all, but then it will be already too late because by then we will be definitely on the downslope. So it's not going to happen when we are tipping over to the downslope. For a quite long time, the story can be sold that, okay, we have switched over to renewables. There will be champagne corks flying around that, hey, we have started to decrease our fossil fuel consumption. We have saved the planet. For a few years, this story can last until the 2030s. And then the realization will start to hit slowly, but more painfully that, hey, we've got product shortages. We can't have that. We can't have that. We can't have, travels abroad. And this will be, some in the early days will be blamed on climate change or climate policies, that we can't have this because of the bad climate policies, but in fact it's going to be because of shortages of real fossil fuel production. But
Mm.
then that's still years away, and it's still a slow boiling crisis, which is completely out of the scope of the media.
Mm. Now, I don't think I've ran this for you past you before, but if you've got a bit of time, I would love to do a quick survey of like the major geopolitical regions around the world and just get a quick take on like what you think their major challenges and opportunities are. Does that sound like something fun?
Yeah, for me, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. I'll work my way through the list. So let's start with the UK. What do you think about the UK's position?
Well, the UK internally is again, and this is based on a Canadian sociologist. I cannot recall his name, but he definitely proved that the UK is already in a pre Civil War crisis. So it's in the preceding state of a real civil war, which can boil on for years or even decades from this point on. So this is a slow boiling crisis there internally, and externally they're still playing like they have the Great Britain Empire. So it's really a so stark of a how to say. Um, Stark contrast between what's happening inside the country, which is really sliding really fast into a third world status outside the city of London and outside some university cities. The rest of the country is really sliding fast back to a pre-industrial status. It's really sad to see. And also the political tensions rising within the country, but outside from the geopolitical perspective, they are still playing this empire chess,
Yeah.
moving chessboard pieces across the
I
global
mean,
landscape.
they were the first country to industrialize, and they've been the first one to deplete their coal and be forced to deindustrialize. Like they're the literal
Yes,
canary in
exactly.
the coal mine.
Exactly. Definitely, they are the canary in the coal mine.
Mm. Okay, what about Europe? I know that's a big, diverse set of players, but how do you see? Well, let's just say the EU as a bloc.
Well, I have no big positive things to say about the EU because I think it's well past its usefulness. It was very useful as a trading bloc or as a bloc for easing commerce across. But as soon as it turned into a geopolitical entity, like as it is today, and opposing itself to Russia and to the Eastern parties, and just acting like a how to say vassal of the United States, it's really past their usefulness. It's really just driving itself to the ground based on their policies. So as far as I know, they are going to spend 20% of their budget, next year's budget, on the Ukraine crisis, which is really unaffordable at this point. And instead of looking for diplomatic solutions, the only solutions they can see is to stop any diplomatic effort and to just push more arms on Ukraine. So that's I really see it's a very bad sad situation because at this point I believe the war cannot be won from the Western side. The only solution is to have a diplomatic solution, to have some kind of an agreement which saves lives instead of killing more people by pushing more arms. So
Let's look at the other
that's the
side of
sad
that.
situation then.
What about Russia? They're a huge territory, but a relatively small population.
Yeah, but they have their own issues. So they have their own economic issues, uh, especially due to the very high central bank interest rates, which they have to run because of the inflation issues. So they also have their own economical issues, but they are still less worse than in Europe. Because as I mentioned, Europe is already on the downslope, and this is not a political statement. This is just a fact. If you are looking at the energy consumption and the economic output of the European Union in terms of real economic output, the Union is already on the downslope since 2017, but latest 2019, the production started to drop because of the fossil fuel issues, by the way. So it's already a scarcity issue because Europe is a huge importer of fossil fuels. We already had some huge issues, and after the rebound of the COVID crisis, we blamed this fossil fuel issue on the Russians because we thought that they are weaponizing natural gas against us, but it was really a global shortage of natural gas and fossil fuels, which then led to this crisis. But then things started to go wrong. But in the perspective of Russia, they will say that, okay, we are done with the West. We will turn to China and we will trade with China because they are already a huge trading bloc. We will not care about what the West think anymore. So they will just turn back. Turn their backs to Europe, and they will have the most chance to survive the longest in this period of decline because they still have their own fossil fuel reserves, they still have their own resources, their own metal resources. They can continue very, very long, even centuries into the future. But since they are also dependent on some outside factors, and since China is nearing their downslope, it's going to be a huge geopolitical challenge for them as well from the Chinese side, because the China will come in and ask for their resources, and this is going to be a huge problem in the coming decades.
What about the Middle East?
The Middle East was partitioned by the UK, so not the UK, but the predecessor, the British Empire was once the First World War ended, and they had to decide what to do with the Ottoman Empire and how to carve up the Ottoman Empire. They intentionally created these type of frictions and tensions in the region. And when Iran broke away after the revolution there and broke away from this imperial structure, they started to look at Iran as the arch enemy, which they have to somehow sink and collapse. They first tried to hire Iraq to invade Iran and try to bring it down in the 1970s and 80s. But then it failed. Then Iraq was on the chopping block because they failed as a vassal, so they had to be get rid of. And then this whole crisis which is going on in the Middle East is so horrible that it's really, I'm really, how to say, ashamed that our government, European governments and North American governments are supporting what's happening there. It's really crazy. But it's again a crisis which has been created a long time ago, and it was just created as a festering wound. It's really not something which can easily heal. It's very hard to heal at the moment.
Do you suspect the Western global system will just discard it once it stops being a source of oil? They'll just kind of turn their back on it and leave people to sort it out themselves because there's no incentive to manage the area for profits?
Still going to be the major source of oil. They are the biggest exporters still of oil, and they are still trying to be the biggest exporters by electrifying whatever they can. They are buying solar panels for billions of dollars, literally, spend billions on trying to electrify their system as well to be able to keep up the exports because they depend on export revenues from oil. So, and I'm sure that this is going to be a key region in the decades ahead to watch, especially when the Permian Basin in America, in the shale oil region, will start to decline, and then America will start to become an importer of oil again. This is going to be a huge and very important region. So it's going to be the focal point of the crisis going ahead in the decades still.
It's like a rubber tree that you have to keep cutting to extract the goodies inside. Yeah. What about India?
India is trying to balance itself between the West and the East, and they try to play this balancing act. But since these tariffs from Trump, they start to believe that maybe the West is no longer our future. Maybe it's in the East, but it's going to be a very fragile truce between India and China. Until the West really breaks and then goes down, which can still take decades. I don't know how long it will take for the West to disappear from the geopolitical scene as a major actor. Until that, they will try to be friendly to each other. But after that, I don't know, two big countries in Southeast Asia, they will be rivals again, and this is going to be a huge geopolitical issue in the time going ahead, especially that both of them are huge importers of oil. So who will control the Middle East? Not America versus the rest, but rather India versus China.
Yeah, and India's got proximity in its favor. It's right next door.
Yes.
Well, speaking of China, what's your position on where China's sitting?
China is sitting actually on the top of its curve, so it's really reached the height of its development curve. The population has started to decline due to this one-child policy, but it's more like the general trends which I explained on the West: this cost of living crisis, this huge inequality which is already rising in China as well. So they are not there is not everything covered in roses, and not everything is super fine there. They're having an overproduction issue. They're overproducing just about anything because they started to scale up everything before demand appeared. And they are now trying to sell everything what they have scaled up so far, like steel production, which is no longer used up by their construction business because that went bust a few years ago. They scaled up solar panel manufacturing to the insane degree, and then car battery manufacturing to an insane degree. And they now have to sell all these products because their companies will go bankrupt. Their solar business is now producing -7% loss every year because they have pushed down prices so low and then in this race to the bottom that they are now making losses and they cannot give up any more profits because they don't have any profits. So the only choice is to push these products as far as they can or as much as they can. And if the world cannot take up more of their products, they are going to experience a deflationary crisis, which will end up in companies having to close doors and their economic contraction will begin. So, and they believe that they are at the very peak of their power for a few years, and then decline is going to hit their side as well.
It reminds me a bit of, do you remember Tamagotchis, the little digital
Yes,
pets?
yes.
The company that made them was like popular across the world, extremely successful, and then they like increased production by like a factor of 10, anticipating more demand, and the trend finished, and the company went bankrupt because they overproduced relative to demand. You have to get that balance just right. Is worth
Yes, it's
talking
very.
about Japan.
Japan is well, it's another vassal of the Western states. So I'm sorry to be so blunt, and I hope I don't hurt the feelings of Japanese listeners. It's really sad to see that how the new Japanese prime minister has just bent the knee in front of Trump, almost literally.
Mm.
It's a sad story because they were going to be the second or even the first biggest economy of the world in the 1980s, but then their banking crisis came and their bubble has been burst, and that's a huge issue for them. And then they are struggling ever since. And since they are also an importer of energy and raw materials, they remain dependent on other outside powers, which will then again create an issue. So if you cannot be a great power if you are dependent on others to supply you with energy and raw materials. And that's the case basically with Europe, definitely with Japan, and this is going to be a huge issue for China as well.
If the US loses that global reach, do you suspect the Japanese will just close their doors for a few hundred years again and just tell the world to go away and just deal with their own affairs?
No, because they cannot keep their lifestyles.
Uh,
If they would close the doors and close off trade, they would have to go medieval again.
hmm.
That's not going to work with the population of 120 million people or 27. I don't know how many they are, but this is definitely unworkable. So if the U.S. releases their hand or somehow the U.S. collapses into chaos, which is a possibility, I do not wish to see that, but that's a possibility that the United States will fall into disarray. But if that happens, then they will start trading with China and Korea. So they will try to create a local trading bloc
Yeah.
around China and Korea, and then try to trade with them as much as possible.
Mm. Now, we're heading east, so let's just do North America, which is mostly the US, but I don't know if you have any thoughts about Canada and Mexico as well.
North America is as far as I can hear it, I'm not living in North America, and I'm trying to survey the mood on the internet, and this is just really a second-hand information what I have. But my feeling is that the social inequality, which is still on the rise there, is going to kill the whole society. So it's so huge and it's so disparaging at this moment that many of the people I know, maybe half of the population, is living paycheck to paycheck,
Mm.
and they cannot afford healthcare, energy, and food at the same time. So they have to decide which one they pay. This month we pay the energy bills, but do not pay for healthcare because we cannot pay for your dentist appointment, or we cannot pay for even treating a serious back injury or things like that. So this is a huge problem, which is then just simply papered over by the government saying that everything is fine because the stock market is growing. But this is so huge disparity between the top 10% and the bottom half or the bottom 90% that this at some point will somehow break the society. I cannot predict how it will break the society or exactly when or why it's going to happen or what's going to be the proximate cause. But I suspect that there will be a serious upheaval there, serious social tensions, which is going to break out and then probably break up the states into smaller entities. That's a realistic probability.
It's funny, like a lot of nations formed in their current like shape because of that rapidly growing industrial process in the 19th century. But they're almost ungovernable outside of those conditions. And I think the US is the poster child for that. It just grew so big because like there was nothing really stopping it, grabbing all that territory and incorporating it. And it's reaching a point of absurdity with the scale that it's on. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it. And yeah, I think I'm broadly in the same position that I think some kind of fragmentation is likely in the States in the next century, maybe sooner. What about South America?
South America is is going to be a not exactly a battleground, but it's going to be a between the East and West. China has already making pronouncement that South America is nobody's backyard,
Hmm.
which is going straight against the Monroe Doctrine, which is still followed by the US. So there is going to be some clashes there, maybe not World War III level type of clashes, but there's going to be a political tug of war between the East and West, who controls South America, because they still have some resources which can be used. They still export more oil than they use. So it's very important for these great powers who will control South America.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you reckon in the long
But
run?
they cannot be independent.
Yeah, do you reckon in the long run it's relative isolation that just shipping things in and out of South America comes at a high cost, that it could be one of the first regions that gets overlooked or disconnected when it's just not worth going that far to get the resources, particularly for China, which has to go all the way across the Pacific Ocean?
Or all the way across the planet from the other
Yeah,
direction to reach Brazil.
yeah.
That's a yeah, that can be an issue for them. So especially for soybeans, they import a lot of soybeans from Brazil, for example, but that's a 12,000 kilometer journey. So that's a huge distance for them, or even more. I don't know how far away they are from China, but it's definitely the other side of the planet. So
Mm.
that can be an issue, but that's again going to boil down to a cost issue. So who can pay the most for the bunker fuel to drive those ships? If China will have the buying power to pay all the fuel to deliver those soybeans from Brazil to China, they will, use those resources.
Mm.
And maybe other parts of the world, maybe Europe will not be able to pay that high price for soybeans from Brazil, so they don't will, so they will not be able to import as much soybeans as before, and then the rest will just simply go to China. So it's going to be really a tug of war who will remain on their feet the longest. And the sooner higher consumption regions fall out of the game, like Europe, is a prime target for killing consumption, because it's really a high consumption region, but low production in terms of low production of energy and resources. If Europe falls out and falls into a third world status where everybody is poor and cannot afford a lot of goods and a lot of products made with energy, then it will free up a lot of energy for other regions. So it can also happen that if Europe, just really falls apart and falls back into an earlier stage, it can free up so many fuel and so many resources that it will be more than enough for the rest of the world to operate comfortably. So that's a dynamic game.
Well, I mean, that links perfectly into talking about Africa, and I think the recent news of France losing its source of cheap uranium from its former
Yes.
colonies is a perfect example of that. And I think you'd also agree that China and the West are kind of maneuvering for access to African resources as well.
China already took over Africa. So even though the West maintains some military bases in Africa, especially the US still maintains an AFRICOM, a central command for African operations. Um, and still many civil wars are raging across the region. But I believe most of the economic connections tying Africa is tying Africa to China already. So they are more tightly connected to China. And since Africa has a lot of mineral resources and China definitely needs those resources, this will remain the same. So I don't believe that the West can take Africa back from China at this point. It's already gone.
And I believe the same thing is happening with Australia, that we used to be America's like little sister, like following her around and doing everything that she wanted us to. And that special relationship seems to be breaking down in response to just the sheer economic influence of China.
Yes, and just the distance, the sheer distance between the US and Australia. And
Mm.
again, those resources which are produced by Australia are much more in higher demand in China. For example, coal.
Mm.
That's in high demand in China, and the distance is not so big. Okay, it's rather big still. It's still halfway around the planet, just north to south and south to north, but it's still not that big of a distance than shipping this coal to the US, for example. That's still not a feasible option.
Mm.
So as long as you can produce resources like iron ore and coal, which will be still used in huge quantities in China, you are, as a nation, much better off aligning yourself with China than aligning yourself with the US, which is already a failing empire, which is already falling apart. It's not wise, but it's, again, politics is not driven by wisdom, but driven by power dynamics and people who can be brought on board to stay on board with this US type of hegemony.
Do you think Australia, looking further ahead, is at risk of being disconnected from global shipping? Like we're so dependent on importing everything in return for just a very small handful of bulk, unimproved commodities, and that we're uniquely vulnerable to just not being of interest to anyone to trade with, and we basically lose access to everything that we've come to expect to support our high consumption lifestyles.
That's a possibility. I'm not sure, or I'm not, privy to Australian economics. I'm not sure what your import and export numbers are or how it looks like.
I think
I'm
we
not
have one of the
material.
simplest economies in the world. It's basically just coal and iron ore and a few traces of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Yeah, that's
vulnerable.
that's a bad situation. Yeah,
Mm.
and as I know that most of your countries is basically desert, so you cannot grow too much food
Mm.
outside the eastmost region. Yeah,
Mm.
around the southeastern part. It's other than that, it's not really possible
Mm.
to grow
Yeah.
much food.
It looks much bigger than it is in practice. Though on
Mhm.
the upside, I think it's one of the few countries in the world that's not worth invading. Like there's so little here that you wouldn't bother like sailing ships down here to try and take over. You just wave some money at us and we'll do whatever you like.
Yeah, yeah, but it's also a possibility that, again, just like other regions of the world, people become poorer. They start to consume less just because of economic necessity. So
Mm.
that's also a possibility until some kind of a quasi equilibrium is hit, where exports meet imports, and then you can, somehow balance out if it's possible.
Mm.
But then, as resources continue to decline, this equilibrium will continue to decline and fall lower and lower. Maybe the country will depopulate again. Maybe the people will migrate away to other regions of the world where there's more economic productivity still. It's still a possibility.
Mm. Mm. Now, I've got a couple of fun final questions that I ask
Yeah.
everyone. And we'll start with the one about if you could wave a magic wand and create some kind of new cultural norm or institution or organization, like what would you try and bring into the world that you think could be useful in the coming decades?
Hmm. I don't believe in cultural organizations or cultural norms to change the entire world economy. Maybe it's just me looking at too high above, so from a too high level, viewpoint. But from my perspective, we have a lot of cultural initiatives, lots of cultural movements already, tons and tens of thousands of them, and still they cannot change the course of the ship. So this is a huge, massive, supermassive organism which is following its own dictates and following its own logic. And I don't believe that culturally this can be changed. What can help, on the other hand, is some local movements which tie together local communities, and then it's every location is going to be different. So maybe it's food production in one region, or maybe it's handicraft production in another region, which can tie together a region and then make it unique or make it viable in the future. But that's not going to be something global, but something more local and more locally organized versus some kind of a new global movement or new religion taking over and pointing the way forward.
You reminded me of the saying that politics is downstream from culture, but to extend that culture is downstream from like material reality.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that perspective of yours. And the other one, I'm not sure if you have an answer for this one, but I also ask people who are like crop breeders and biologists if they could wave a magic wand and create a new living organism that could be useful in the world. What would you wish for?
A plastic eating microbe bacteria or whatever, which is really can clean up all the plastic and clean up especially those persistent chemical pollution, which is in the soil and in everywhere. So if you could spray these bacteria on soil and then just start to eat up all those chemicals and break down them into more manageable or less harmful forms, then that could help a lot,
I
especially
believe
in.
they've found wild microbes that eat the polyfluorinated, the forever chemicals. So
Oh, that's very
yeah,
good. That's
yeah,
good news. So
they do exist, but how abundant they are and how much they can be encouraged, I guess they're still working on. So yeah, I think there is hope on that front. So yeah, I like that answer too. Okay, so B, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It's been a really interesting conversation. Where can people find more of your work?
yeah, I'm writing primarily on Substack. So if you visit thehonestsorcerer.substack.com, this is where you can find my work and read my latest articles. So be sure to subscribe there.
Excellent. Yeah, I can highly recommend it. You're one of my favorite sources now to keep my finger on the pulse of the evolving resource constraint situation around the world.
Thank you.
If you want to support Recombination Nation, sign up to my Substack for a paid account. That will give you access to my archive of past articles and the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse.